you don't want the stomach flu. So we are going to start our program at this point. So the program is Understanding the U.S. Legal Markets. We have former speakers here. To my immediate right is Thomas Enan. He is with the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority in Washington, D.C. Sina Portnow is right next to him. She is from Guggenheim Partners in New York City. She's an in-house counsel. Next to Sina is Agnes Avanza. She just graduated last year and was a foreign associate at Linklaters for 1 year. So that's one of the jobs that many of you will be looking into. So she will give you her perspective. And last but not least is Elliot Rosenberg, and he's with Gordon and Reese in Philadelphia. So without any further ado, I'm going to just start the panel. And the first question I'm going to start with Mr. Rosenberg is, can you briefly introduce yourself a little bit more fully than I did and give a brief synopsis of what your career path has been so far?
Sure. My name is Ilan Rosenberg. I'm originally from Mexico. I went to law school in Mexico and I got my LLM at Penn Law in 2002. I'm a partner in the insurance coverage and commercial litigation group at Gordon & Reese, which is a San Francisco firm which has an office in Philadelphia. It's a large firm. It's got 550 lawyers. And I've been doing litigation for the past 11 years since graduating. I'm also, a fair amount of my practice involves litigation that arises in Latin America and ends up in the United States. And in addition to my law practice, I'm also frequently called upon to be an expert on Mexican tort law as well. And I also teach at Penn Law. I actually teach a course for the LLM students at Penn Law. So if you're unlucky enough to end up in my class, I may see you next semester.
Well, hi. Yes, now it's on. I am Agnes Arbaiza. I am a Peruvian attorney. I worked in Peru in a top-ranked law firm, Echecopar, Baker & McKenzie, for nearly 10 years. And after that, I decided to do my LLM here at UPenn. And I also took the Wharton Business and Law Certificate at NITES. Really interesting. Financial accounting courses, corporate finance, highly recommended. And I worked for nearly a year at the global law firm Linklaters in the New York office of Linklaters in the banking and capital markets department. I was working mainly supporting transactions with Latin American clients and also promoting business development activities in the region. In addition to that, I've been working for the past 7 years in connection to the Vance Center from the New York City Bar. It's like the nonprofit arm of the New York City Bar, promoting pro bono projects and implementing a network of attorneys committed to render free legal services in Peru and elsewhere in the region. So, well, it's a pleasure to be here, and we'll discuss about many things, including some tips about recruiting and interviewing in the U.S.
Hi, I graduated in 2005 and I went to a law firm. I did asset management, hedge funds, and securities regulations. In a couple of years I moved in-house to Lehman. Lehman collapsed, as you all know. Was an interesting experience. I ended up a part of Lehman asset management division. They acquired a big chunk of it, which is called Neuberger Berman, a while ago. So we reacquired Neuberger Berman out of bankrupt Lehman, and I continued working for Neuberger Berman for some time. And then I moved on to Guggenheim Fund Solutions, which is a part of Guggenheim Group of Asset Management and Funds. And I practice their asset management.
Hi, first I wanted to thank Caroline for having me for, I guess this is the third year of this panel. Any Americans here this year's? Okay, that's good. I think I was the only American in my LLM class. I was kind of odd because I went to college, and in America you go to college without focusing on law, and only then do you decide that you want to be a lawyer, and you usually get your JD. So I took a job after I finished college and met another American who had been to law school in England, and he and I got talking, and it seemed like an interesting option to go to England, where it's a common law system. I remember my girlfriend at the time who went to NYU Law School right out of college, and I just remember her getting home and crying after her first year classes, and that inspired me to look into something else. So I went to law school in England, and I wanted to get a good grounding in the American system, so I thought by doing an LLM here in general courses, that would give me a good basis to practice in the American environment. So I did that. I practiced first in Providence, Rhode Island. It's kind of a strange choice because I have no connections up in New England. I ended up not liking that very much. The traditional practice of law just wasn't for me. So I gravitated to something called crisis communications, which is where it's a public relations focus where you help usually very large corporations that have legal trouble, like class action suits brought against them. And I started taking part in that and counseling lawyers on how to deal with the press when they were confronted with these gigantic lawsuits. Then I eventually gravitated to the world of finance. And I was a financial advisor and ultimately got into the securities regulation industry. So there seems a lot of disconnection between my various career paths, but I think ultimately what I'm doing now integrates some of my public relations background with advertising. For instance, what I do now at FINRA is analyze the advertising of very large broker-dealers. If they're doing a national campaign, we look at what they're presenting to the public and make sure that it's compliant with regulations of the SEC and others. And somehow it's integrated a lot of my different interests, and it's, I think, the right career choice for me at this point.
Can you also touch upon how you received your first job? Was it through networking or was it through a job fair? How did you best position yourself to obtain that first position?
My first job was right out of Penn Law, and I had no firm idea of what I wanted to do in terms of the legal practice. I thought maybe litigation was probably the most interesting, intellectually speaking, the most intellectually stimulating part of law. So, of course, you're limited somewhat as an LLM student, at least without a JD. You have the New York bar, you can take the California bar. There are certain smaller states, more obscure states like Rhode Island that also let you take the bar. So I looked at large law firms in every state that I thought might be interesting to work in and sent out resumes to them. These were the days before electronic submission of resumes, so you sent out hard copy to people. And I basically sent out a lot of resumes and followed up with them, and it was kind of a traditional way of getting a job back then.
I started with a resume. I made sure that I went to a practicing attorney in the U.S. and did a good job with my resume. That's step number one, because we're all coming from foreign backgrounds and things that we think are very clear may not be clear. If you participate in some kind of litigation but which has a particular weird name, which is meaningful in your jurisdiction, it may not be meaningful here. Make sure that you don't have things like that. This is just flood warning. Then I went online. I knew the chances of getting in a very big law firm are very small, and I wanted to be in the US, and I wanted to practice asset management. So I went into one of the legal systems, big legal systems, and said I want investment management, and got 700 law firms, from very large law firms to very small 10-person shops, and I was sending resumes to pretty much all of them and got like 5 or 6 interviews from around 100 resumes that I sent. I went, interviewed, and I picked the ones that I liked the most. That's how I started. And the thing is, I think what is very important is not to get stuck, I have to make $180,000 and work for Simpson and Thatcher. You're not going to be there. I mean, unless you have outstanding, stellar A+ grades and you have extraordinary experience dealing with the US law or something else, you're not going to get big law firms. So look at smaller firms, look at the firms if you have experience and that's what you want to do, try to position yourself this way. If you don't have experience in the field that you want to practice, just send resumes, call people, network.
Well, I have to disagree a little bit because, in my opinion, this comment goes especially for the Latin American students. If you are coming from a developing country in Latin America, in this case, basically Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and others, because of course other countries have had a bigger development in the past, like Chile, for example. So right now, the chances are that it's more likely they will want to be interested in hiring attorneys from developing countries. I think you have a good chance to getting a position as a foreign associate in a big law firm. Because the way I see it is this: New York-based law firms, the large white shoe big law firms in New York City, are focused right now on strengthening their relationships with Latin American law firms, because when they strengthen their relationship with the law firms in Latin America, they are more likely to get more deals. And in a practice such as the capital markets practice, it is key to build bridges and strengthen these relationships. So in my experience, the way these firms are trying to gain a larger access to the market in the Latin American region is by recruiting and hiring attorneys that come from big law firms in the region. Of course, it's not only networking, it has to do about your grades. You have to have good grades. But I think that if you focus on the relationships with your partners in your law firms, and they have some connections with partners in New York-based law firms, and they can exchange talent and deals, there is a big chance for you to get a position as a foreign associate in one of these big law firms. I think it's very difficult to get a permanent position, but I think the foreign associate figure, which is a one-year program in many of these New York law firms, is absolutely accessible for you. And the way I got my job at Linklaters was thanks to UPenn throughout the New York Job Fair. We had to submit our resumes online, and we were called to participate in the New York Job Fair. And after getting the request for a number of interviews, I finally got recruited by this firm. But what I'm trying to say here is I think you have to work a lot on your networking and explore opportunities of doing business with your law firms, your own home country law firms, and your law firm targets in the U.S. In my case, it was focusing on business possibilities between my firm and U.S. firms in New York. So that's how, in my case, I tried to focus my networking. And indeed, my partners were sending emails supporting my candidacy to those firms. And in many cases, picking up the phone and making a phone call. We would like to strengthen our relationship with you. We would like to have more deals with your firm. It would be great if you could hire Agnes and have her work with you and gain more experience so that after this year, she can come back to our firm in Peru and work with us as a senior associate, for example. So I would tell you to try to focus a lot on your networking and thinking about your specific assets. If you come from a Latin American country, I think you have to focus on business development strategies and talking with your partners about that. I have friends from Europe that, given the economy, they haven't had, the possibility of focusing the networking in terms of business development. But still, some of them got positions as foreign associates in law firms. I have two Italian friends, very good Italian friends that got jobs at firms in litigation, for instance. They weren't networking and talking about let's do business in the capital markets or banking industry, but they were trying to network with whatever they had in their pockets, right? So I think you have to think about your specific assets and your strength in terms of who you know, and of course, if your partners or your team co-workers in your home country are willing to help you network, I think chances are big.
I I've followed, I guess, a very different path in the sense that I've had what I would call a very traditional professional career in the U.S. as if I were any other U.S. lawyer or JD graduate. But let me start out with sort of the bad news. The likelihood of finding a job as an LLM graduate is limited. It's very limited. Agnes mentions the foreign associate positions, and I will tell you that there's this entire class that may be interested in a foreign associate position, as is every other LLM class in every other law school in the United States. So the reality is that finding a job in the U.S., from my perspective, is a question of drive and determination and commitment. It is not an easy task, and frankly, it's not as obvious today as it may have been 2 or 3 years ago, but JD candidates were not getting a job in the U.S. coming out of Penn Law. They were being deferred for years. So there's certain things that I'm going to recommend to you based on my personal experience. They may work for some of you. They may not work for others. When I came to Penn Law, I came under unique circumstances because my wife is from Philadelphia, and she and I had essentially decided that we were going to live in Philadelphia. I applied to the LLM program at 3 schools, 2 of them in New York, and Penn Law in Philadelphia. I got into 2 of the 3 programs. The 3rd program let me know that I didn't get in when I was a month and a half into the LLM program at Penn Law. I do not have a great opinion of that school, but I didn't to begin with. It was actually the last of my 3 choices, fortunately. But I came here knowing that I was going to be working in the U.S., that I needed to be in the Philadelphia area, or at least close by, which at the time New York seemed a viable alternative. Fortunately for me, I didn't really need to experiment and figure out if that was truly viable or not, because the commute is pretty tough. If you live in Philadelphia and work in New York, that's several hours of your day sitting on a train. But what I came to learn was that there's many approaches you need to take if you're truly committed to trying to find a job in the United States. Number 1, there's the traditional course of finding someone you know at a law firm, and trust me, if you don't find some connection to a law firm and you send a cover letter and a resume, it's going to be put on top of a pile of resumes. Well, actually, I'm not being accurate. It's going to be put underneath all the JD candidates in the middle of the pile somewhere. The reason why I say that is U.S. law firms are comprised 99% of U.S. JD graduates. And as you might imagine, it's easier to relate to and understand what a JD candidate has gone through and what they've learned than what an LLM student who comes from a foreign jurisdiction might have learned in law school or getting their LLM. So you need to find a point of contact in whatever law firm it is you're going to approach, whatever company it is you're going to approach, whatever nonprofit it is you're going to approach. And write directly to the people with whom you have a contact. Number 2, probably more important, is how you make yourself stand out. You will sit through lectures and practice sessions and read through sample letters and sample resumes over and over and over again, to the point where everything seems to be a form that you fill in. Don't fill in forms. Don't write letters that look like a form. Write something that makes you stand out. Agnes was mentioning Latin America as an emerging market generally. I have experience and have had continuous experience working in Latin American matters for the past, I guess I graduated from law school 15 years ago, so for the past 15 years I've been working in matters that involve Latin America. So make sure you're looking at law firms that do business in Latin America. Make sure you look at deals, you read the newspapers, you read the business trade papers, to see who's doing what in your country of origin and see who's representing them. Find those firms, try to find a point of contact in those firms, and send them something that says, oh, not something that says, it was a pleasure meeting with you. Thank you for taking the time. I found your firm very interesting. Say something to the effect of, my experience in my home country has involved A, B, C, and D. And based on our meeting or based on what I've seen, I realize that my skills would match up well with your new practice or your emerging practice in this area. Do things that make you stand out. Next, networking is fundamental. You never know where jobs are going to come from, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that jobs don't come just from paper. So you need to meet people, you need to talk to people, you need to get ideas from people. It's not just a question of finding a job, it's a question of what you do with your job afterwards too. Where are your clients going to come from? Who can you consult with? What are my questions? How is this practice different than it is in my country? I will tell you that I had 3 job offers when I graduated from the LLM program, which was extremely unusual. I had sent, at the very least, about, I think it was 75 resumes and letters, and had about 40 or 50 interviews. And out of those, I got 3 job offers, and I had more job offers than anybody else in my class. I had 1 job offer to be a clerk in the courts in Philadelphia. And my background had little to do with it. It just happened that at the time, the president judge of the Court of Common Pleas of Philadelphia County is a friend of my father-in-law's. So that got me in the door. Frankly, it's a little easier in the public sector to find jobs based on these relationships than it is in the private sector, and I'll tell you why in a second. My second job offer was as a foreign associate at Cleary Gottlieb in New York. It was not a position I was interested in. I was not interested in a 1-year position. I was going to stay here, so commuting to New York for a year just to have them say thank you very much for your time was not going to work out for me. And my third job offer, which was the offer I ultimately took, was at the firm that I practiced at for 11 years before joining Gordon & Reese, which was a large, Cozen O'Connor, which is a very large Philadelphia firm, national firm, also equivalent in size to my current firm. And the way in which I got there was through one of my professors at Penn Law. One of the adjuncts here at Penn Law, fortunately for me, we hit it off, we got along great, happens to be probably one of the, if not the most prominent lawyer in the United States, whose name is Ken Feinberg. He doesn't teach here anymore, but he was the lawyer who managed the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. He managed for a long time the BP Oil Spill Compensation Fund, and he just happens to know absolutely everybody, and everybody wants to be on his good side. He and I became friends. He wrote letters of recommendation, and that opened the door for interviews. Let me just point out how important it is for you to make yourself stand out as a candidate for employment. Starting salaries in the U.S. in law firms, small or large, as a general rule, far exceed starting salaries in other countries by magnitudes. So I can have a very, very close friend who recommends somebody to come work at my firm. That doesn't mean I'm willing to pony up a 6-figure salary every year just based on our friendship. I will have them in the door, but if they don't jump out at me as somebody who can offer something unique to my practice, to my firm, I'm not going to, gamble with $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in the medium term just because I have a very good friend. So my suggestion to you, talk to everybody. Anybody who expresses an interest in you, reciprocate. Be interested in them. Find out about their practice. Find out about what they do. And get their ideas, get their thoughts. I think that will help you tremendously, because that's how I managed to find a position. We had a class of 100 students. 4 of us had job offers at the end of the year.
I would like to introduce the last panelist. Due to the weather, everyone had a little bit of delays this morning, but Oba Adewale is from Iroko Pharmaceuticals. He's an in-house counsel there, and I'd like to ask you just to give a brief overview of your background and how you received your first job as well.
Good morning, guys. Apologies for coming a little bit late. I was at Penn. I was at the LLM program 2008. I graduated 2008, and then I never planned to stay back. Like many other people, I just wanted to have the experience and go back to my home country of Nigeria, where I was about 2 years away from partnership, being a partner. So I didn't plan to stay back. But as things change, I fell in love, and then you know how that goes, and things changed. So, but things changed for me really late in the game. I hadn't prepared to look for a job. I didn't plan to. Although I did have a contact, I had about 2 contacts. I had worked with White & Case, San Francisco. While I was in Nigeria, I had some exchange program, worked there for a while, and then and also there's this other firm that I worked in with DC in Nigeria. So I had 2 contacts that I didn't really explore much about it because I didn't plan to stay. But I kept contact, and by the time my emotions were changing and things were changing, I was weighing up my options. What do I have to do? But what I think I did that really was helpful was that I had a professor, an adjunct professor here, who I became friends with. He was from Nigeria as well. He had similar background as I had. We went to the same college back home, and then we had very similar training. And so when I began to think about staying back, I began to talk to him, and then he said, "Okay, why don't you apply to all of these places?" I applied to all of these places, and then one of the companies that he had interest in, I applied there as well, and then I went to this interview. I was interviewing with Penn alumni, and it wasn't an interview really, it was just a discussion. I was aware that and everything, and I started working there. And then from then on, I had worked there up to now.
Thank you. As we're talking about application materials and interviewing tips, when you receive a packet of applications from a stack of resumes and cover letters, can you tell me a little bit about what stands out for you, whether if there's something specific about the resume or something specific about the cover letter that usually makes you think like, wow, this person is a good fit for my organization?
Yeah, I would say, and this complements some of the earlier comments made, a resume is, in a lot of cases, just a tool to get you in front of somebody or a group of people. And it depends a lot on the nature of the organization you're working for, how vital the resume is. In your case, I would make sure that it's impeccable in terms of accuracy and language. That I would have a native English speaker take a look at the resume and make sure that it's good in terms of grammatical correctness and even idiomatic English, because not many people are native English speakers here. So make sure that's all accurate. At FINRA, my organization, if you make a mistake in the resume, I mean a careless error that could have been caught by spell check, you're immediately eliminated from consideration, because that's an easy thing for anybody to catch. You just do spell check and it will catch inaccuracy. So be cognizant of that, but once you've gotten that down, be aware that a resume is usually not looked at with terrific care with somebody. Somebody will say, well, this is an accurately written, resume with the sorts of qualities I'm looking for. But the real hiring decisions are made, the real engagement happens when you get in front of somebody, as we've all been discussing. So networking, we've gotten into that in some depth. One technique I've used to get at least 2 jobs, maybe a third, is something that's neglected by a lot of people, because the legal profession is kind of formal. It's more formal and disciplined than a lot of other professions. But if you know someone, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be very close friends with them. You could be just a business contact of theirs, and they know somebody in an organization you're interested in working in. Call them up, or first send a resume and follow that up with a phone call, and just say, it's especially easy if you're local, if you're geographically close to them. Say, listen, I'm going to be in New York or Philadelphia or Washington. I sent you my resume a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it, but I'll be stopping in town for a half a day or a day, and I'd like to talk to you for 15 minutes about what you do. Don't hit them up for a job. Like, I want to use my resume to get the earliest available position. Don't be that kind of crude. Just come in and say, listen, I want to find out about what you do. At FINRA, they would be less amenable to that, because it's more like a law firm where it's very rigorously structured and it's a formal interview process. But at a lower level, where if you're just graduating from school, they may say, yeah, I'm willing to talk to you for 10 minutes. It once happened to me when I was looking for a job in Washington. I was moving to Washington because the woman who became my wife was working in the area. I had to move from Philadelphia to Washington, and I didn't know anyone. I had no social connections or family connections, but I did know somebody who knew somebody in a public relations firm that was an excellent top public relations firm. He and I got talking, and he said, oh, I know so-and-so. Why don't you send her a resume, which I did. She didn't know me from Adam, and she was willing to meet me for 10 minutes. It turned out that fit wasn't exactly right in that part of the public relations firm. But she said, in the course of that discussion, she said, oh, I know so-and-so down the hall who was in a litigation communications group who is looking for somebody. So once you get in and start talking to people, and they like you, they have face-to-face contact with you and find out you're a personal individual who might get along with somebody else and might be a good fit. That can be a huge advantage. Once you get in the door, you may find a fit within an organization just because somebody there likes you. They may not want to hire you for their department, but they may want to see how you work in another department. So that's one critical technique that I think more people should take advantage of.
So I guess when I receive resumes, first thing I do not to waste my time is I look at GPA. If you are below 3.8, I'm not interested. So please make sure that you are not taking extremely difficult classes and not taking a lot of them the first half a year. I made that mistake. The classes at University of Pennsylvania are absolutely terrific, and you want to take maximum. So I did like 80 credit hours while 16 were allowed. So it was extremely difficult. English is not the first language. I took securities regulations, corporations, contracts the first semester, and working classes like international corporate finance and something else. So make sure that you have your runway. Make sure that to the extent that you're seriously interested in U.S. markets, you make sure that you take classes that you think you can handle the first semester. Second semester, you will understand the American system. It's very different from systems you're coming from, many of you coming from. You'll know how to take exams. You'll be more comfortable taking them. There is a chance you'll get better grades next semester. So don't undermine yourself by doing yourself a disfavor and taking difficult classes and getting bad grades in them. Second thing that I'm looking at resumes would be experience. So in my case, I'm usually looking for a position to fill, so there is an announcement on our website as to what we're looking for and what kind of skills we're looking for. So to the extent that you're looking at an open position, make sure that your resume reflects those points. If I'm looking for 10b-5 experience, or if I'm saying, okay, I need somebody who can fill out Form D, I'm just saying, have fund experience reviewing subscription books, make sure that you have that in your resume, because that's what I will be looking for. That's the position that I'm looking to fill. And then, obviously, grammar. It's very important to have proper grammar and just the style of resume. You can always see whether it's a 5-minute project or a person spent quite a bit of time on the resume.
Just to clarify, Penn doesn't rank by GPA, so you will not have like a 3.5 to be able to put on your actual resume. However, many employers will want to see your transcripts, so they will be able to see your grades from your transcript. But you won't be able to list your actual GPA at Penn.
And here's how important it is. And I find it a little bit snobby of American market, but that's how it is. This is they make it very easy for themselves. They believe that you're in competition, so if you're truly smart, you will have good grades. So that's how they look at things. And one more important thing, cover letter. Make sure that you have cover letters.
Well, I've been on both sides of the table, improve recruiting attorneys, interviewing them and checking the resumes, but I think I should better dedicate this time to tell you about my experience drafting my own resume and trying to approach a job opportunity in the U.S. legal market. So what I would say is the most important part of this process is studying your target. Identify your targets, study it very well, not only understand what their practice is, their latest transactions, their deals, the main partners, their hiring partners, but also tailor afterwards your resume in accordance to that position and that law firm. I was interviewed by 15 law firms in the New York Job Fair and finally got offers from 2. And I chose the law firm with whom my firm in Peru had never worked before. So in my case, it wasn't only networking. I think it was that my resume and my interview did impress them, or maybe I clicked with them, or they liked me. And well, afterwards when I worked at Linklaters, they told me, well, what we liked about you and about your resume is that first of all, you seem to match the experience that we needed in our Latin American practice, and specifically in the capital markets practice, because I had a background of working many years in leading transactions in my country. Of course, transactions are smaller than transactions in the US, but I had acquired transferable skills. I had experience negotiating all the government documents of a transaction. I had experience drafting, editing, of course, closing deals, and basically I tried to put in words not only all these skills, but how I would be a strong asset for them. So what I'm trying to say is focus on your target and try to mirror whatever they seem to be needing within their LATAM practices or whatever practice they have, and put that in your resume. In the interview, I think what helps is not only trying to show them you have strong communication skills and that you're able to clearly express what your thoughts are, of course, and show them you're very enthusiastic and willing to learn, even though you do have some experience on your shoulders, right? But I think that showing confidence and having prepared the questions they may ask you, being prepared in terms of knowing what they work on, and also having information about what's going on in your own country. Even though we're not going to be working as ambassadors, they sometimes assume you will know everything from your own countries. So in an interview, in 2 of my interviews, I was asked about political issues, and luckily I have been reading the newspapers from Peru, so I was able to answer those questions. But I know that other friends of mine weren't as prepared, and I think those little things can make a difference in an interview. But I think it's basically what has been said before: tailoring your resume to whatever the needs of your target is, preparing your cover letter very well, expressing not only your experience, but that you're willing to learn if you are applying for an associate position. And I would say that another tip for networking, not only for law firms, but mainly for international organizations such as the World Bank, the UN, the IDB, is not being afraid of giving a call or sending an email, a cold email, and saying, "I would love to work at your organization in the future. I would love to know what your day-to-day work is. I would like to have a coffee with you." And these people from the I would say the nonprofit sector or the international organization sector will be very likely to give you an interview or just have coffee with you and spend 15 minutes of your time very easily. It can be harder to try to send a cold email or make a cold phone call to a law firm. I don't think they'll answer you that easily because they're very busy, and I think it's hard to break in that way. But it's easier to do that with nonprofits, NGOs, and international organizations. In my experience, I have been going back and forth to DC many times, having coffees and lunch and dinners with people that I've never seen in my life before. I just spotted them through the website. I read what the work was. I tried to target some positions that could match my profile, and I asked them to just meet with me to discuss about how their organization is working, what their future needs could be, and after networking in that way, I think it is possible to get, if not a job offer, perhaps a formal job interview, which in my case has happened. I've recently had one interview at the UN for a legal officer position, a P3, which is kind of like a good position because it's not an entry level, it would be kind of like a senior officer. And I also had an interview at the IDB 2 weeks ago for a consultant position, a 2-year contract consultant position, again, a senior position. And I did not know anybody in these organizations. The way I got these interviews was after having lots of coffees and lunches with many of the people that were kind enough to give me 15 minutes of their time. So I'm not saying to do these cold emails and phone calls to law firms. I think it's a little more difficult, and you should focus on your networking and people you may have in common, people you may know. But if you are interested in working or developing network with nonprofits, NGOs, or international organizations, I would say do not be afraid of sending these cold emails or phone calls because I think it's part of the culture they have. They are always open to receive strangers, and if you do have the stellar credentials, the experience, the background, I mean, you're here in UPenn. I mean, you must have like amazing credentials yourselves. So I think it's a matter of just doing it, picking up the phone, taking a train. Of course, investing money in taking a train because nonprofits will not pay for your fares, as opposed to law firms who did pay for everything. These organizations won't, but they will be more open to get in touch with you and give you some of their time. And before I forget, another interesting thing about these nonprofits and international organizations is that they are willing to make, in my opinion, long-term offers for foreign trained attorneys, and they do not have some visa limitations as opposed to law firms. If you apply to a law firm, you will have to use your F1 visa with the OPT, the optional professional training. I'm sure you'll learn about that at some point during this year. Apply for that. You will need it if you want to work for a year after you graduate from UPenn. But it's only for 1 year. After that year, if you want to work in a law firm, you will have to file an H1 visa, meaning that you will need a sponsorship from a law firm. Law firm has to pay like $7,000 approx, file papers, and request you as an employer, as a worker. And they will have to, it's kind of difficult because they will have to make an argument why they're choosing you instead of an American attorney. And law firms and any other for-profit company will be subject to a cap because the U.S. government only issues 100,000 H-1 visas per year for these organizations, meaning law firms and for-profits. So if you don't file on time and if you don't have a sponsor on time, you may be subject to this cap and you may be out of the market, not because you're not talented, but just because of a migratory issue. On the other hand, the nonprofits and the international organizations are not subject to this cap. They can request and file for H-1 visas without any restriction of number, and some entities such as international organizations, World Bank, UN, IDB, they don't even have to go through this H-1 visa procedure. They would just hire you and request a diplomatic visa for you, a J3 or J4. So when you are applying and making plans about working, I would say take into consideration many factors, your of course your goals, but also your network opportunities and the visa issue. It's very important.
So I forgot to mention, that's why I mentioned smaller size law firms. You have a terrific credential in terms of you have UPenn. This is something that smaller firms can sell. They cannot get UPenn JD because they are 20 or 30 or 40 people firm with $40,000-$50,000 in comp. UPenn JD will never go there because UPenn JD probably going to have around $200,000 in credits to pay back. So they cannot afford going to positions like that. You, on the other hand, going to be something that a big asset for them they can sell. They will be also willing to sponsor you when they are smaller. And I think the other thing that I would mention, to your point, don't send resumes. I mean, you have to send them to HR, but I would also find a partner within the firm responsible for that particular field that you're interested in, or they are looking, and would write to the partner directly. Make sure that when you're writing to a partner, make sure that it's not a standard cover letter you're doing, that it's actually tailored to the position and you're explaining yourself why you're writing to the particular partner.
I agree completely with that finding the influencer to send the resume to is far more constructive than going to HR. And to extend this discussion of small firms versus mega firms, which we discussed earlier, I think you should ask yourself, a lot of foreign lawyers might come over here and the names they'll know will be mega firms in New York, Philadelphia to a much lesser extent, but New York and maybe some in California or Washington. But know what you're getting into if you are looking into mega firms, because the life is not something that everyone is going to thrive in. And ironically, it's hardest to often get jobs in these firms, but kind of be cognizant of what you're asking to get into because of the enormous hours that are demanded of you often. But the reality of JD students, and you'll become aware of this as the year goes on, but a lot of JD students here at Penn and elsewhere will come out of school and they'll be in debt. I mean, I'm not sure what the average debt is. $200,000. That's a good amount of money. So they're in a position where they have to take the highest paying job that they get coming out, and there's intense competition for those jobs because they pay well, they're high prestige, they're internationally recognized firms, but the life isn't always the rosiest, working enormous numbers of hours, etc. So be aware that you're in competition with them, highly indebted JD students who are sometimes desperate to get the most high-paying jobs they can, but know what sort of life you're getting into. And get into the idea of interviewing. I'm not sure if that's just to mention something about that. Has anyone here interviewed people? I know some of you have legal experience. No experience there? I've done a lot of interviewing in various jobs, and by far the biggest problem in interviewing I find is boredom. That most people during interviews it's a recipe for boredom because you're asking someone to describe themselves, and that's a legitimate part of it in the interviewing process. But most people don't know how to describe their history or their academic past in interesting terms. They just kind of go into autopilot. They just kind of spout out some prepared speech or something. And it's good to have some prepared remarks, but when you're responding to someone, don't try to make it brief. one of the best interviewing books I've read is 1 Minute and You're Hired. It's kind of a cheesy title, but it emphasized how important it is to be concise. Just 1 minute, and you should be able to respond to almost any question within that amount of time. The second vital thing I found during interviews is that people don't ask enough questions about your firm or about you. So personally, sometimes that can be a good idea if you get into a kind of a discussion like that. But you should be incredibly well prepared about what firm you're going in to see. Specifically, you should know what sorts of deals they may have done or what the focus of different practice groups is. But ask questions. Have at least 10 or 20 questions ready for them. Because it's not just flattering. I mean, to have somebody ask a question about you, it shows that you're interested in it, and it shows that you've done your homework. It changes the whole tenor of the interview. It's not just an interviewer asking questions that they get a 5-minute dull response to. It establishes more rapport during that interview.
One of the offers I got was we discussed for half an hour a very obscure opera that the guy sponsored. I found out that he was sponsoring it because I did a Google search on him.
Yeah, that's, I guess, following up on that just quickly. Remember that pretty much every single law firm has their own website, and every single lawyer's website, every single law firm's website is going to have at least a very brief, sometimes not so brief bio on every lawyer there. So you can be well prepared not only to discuss matters that you know the firm might be involved in, but you'll also get a personal view into the lawyer that you are, or multiple lawyers that you're going to be meeting with, and that might help you tailor your approach to each individual meeting.
They've said everything, really. Resumes is important, how it comes across, how it looks. The good thing is you have very good guys here who can help you with that. They've done good work. I've seen 3 resumes of 4 from the last law school last year, and they were really good. They were really well prepared. So I'm proud to say you can rely on these guys to help you. Secondly, I would also say, like every other, since I've started on the love scene, so let me continue with that. So like every other relationship you try to cultivate, for example, you want to date a girl, you are in a better position if you know who you're dealing with. So if you, for example, you know somebody like flowers, and you're meeting them for the first time you send flowers, they tend to be drawn to you. If you know they love to go to these restaurants and you take them to that restaurant, they are happy to talk to you. It's the same thing with your interviewers. Knowing the person who is interviewing you and knowing the firm, they've said it and they couldn't have said it any better. I've been involved in a lot of interviews in the last 6 months or maybe a little bit more than that, and most of the candidates that jump out at me are the ones who I seen that know so much about my company, about the company I work for. They know the drugs that we are filing NDAs on. They know when we plan to launch. They know what are all of the stuff we've done in the market. They have this knowledge. So I get the feeling talking to them that they are really interested in us, and then they want to work with this company. They would give you, even about me, they would say, oh, I know you went to Penn like this. It's flattering for the person interviewing you to know that you know so much about them, and you cannot do wrong with that, because it makes the person feel at ease, and then they get the impression that you have emotional intelligence, you are aware of what is around you. And the other part that I also would want you to recognize, you're coming from a different culture, and then this is something that I had to grapple with as well. You're coming from a different culture. Things are done differently most of the time from where you come from. You have to learn that resumes are different from the way resumes are made to look in the US are different from what they are from wherever. From where I come from, we call them CVs. We do CVs, curriculum vitae, which is longer. It tells a whole story about you. But yeah, they are shorter. Like I said, you can rely on these guys. Not only that, interviewing people. What I learned culturally was that when I go to do interviews, I had to learn this. I didn't look straight into people's eyes because culturally, for me, you don't look straight into people's eyes in my culture. it comes across as somehow rude or disrespectful if you look straight into people's eyes when you talk to them. But the exact reverse is here. If you don't look into people's eyes, they see you as either creepy or you're hiding something or something is wrong with you or you're not confident.
Overly submissive.
Overly submissive, and it look like you're not confident. So I had to learn that. Some of these cultural things, little nuances, you have to learn them, you have to grab them, you have to pay attention to them, because the way it is interpreted around here is different from what you're used to. And that's just, you just have to, preparation is key, you know. You can be prepared by talking to the guys in your career planning. Just discuss with them, I'm going for this interview, what do you think are the questions that they might ask me? What do you think I should be prepared for? And then, like I said, you probably would get no job without networking. You just have to know somebody. It's just the way it works. There's no two way about it. You either somebody you know from your home country or somebody you met here through somebody. You have to connect with people, and nobody's going to give you, 5-figure, 6-figure jobs without being confident about who they're giving the money to.
Let me just, I was actually going to start out with that, just asking you, how many of you are from Asia? How many of you are from Latin America? Africa? Europe? Okay, you all have a lot to learn. You're going to have to talk and you're going to have to interact, and you're very fortunate in that the LLM program here is going to put you in class with all these JD students and talk to them and meet them. And trust me, to them, there is little more exciting in terms of meeting people at law school, meeting people in law school, than meeting people who are already practicing lawyers in a different culture. You will be able to give them a lot. They will be able to give you a lot. You will learn a lot about the U.S. culture from interacting with them, and take advantage of that. There are tremendous cultural differences. They'll come out right away during an interview. And I can tell you that, having interviewed LLMs and JDs, and JDs who are from foreign countries, and LLMs who are US students versus LLMs who are foreign students, there are a lot of cultural differences. So try to pick up on the cues of how to interview for a US audience. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, which we haven't, I guess nobody really has brought up, is we've discussed law firms, we've discussed big versus small, we've talked about NGOs, but there's one thing that I personally appreciate more about the U.S. legal market, above all other legal markets that I've dealt with, and that is the private nonprofit practice of law in the United States. I don't know if any of you are interested in it. I don't know if any of you care for it. I know a lot of people who come to the U.S., come from foreign countries, from practicing law, and this is not to say anything bad about anyone specifically, but as a general rule around the world, there's a bourgeois element to the practice of law. Okay? And a lot of people start out in law school and think, well, I'm going to do something big, I'm going to do something important. And the notion of what big and important means is not necessarily accurate. I have devoted, and I tell you this with a great sense of pride, I have devoted thousands of hours to doing pro bono work. I've devoted thousands of hours to the point where I've gotten in trouble at my firm for devoting so much time to doing pro bono work. Okay, but there's a reason for it. I have clients in the pro bono world that show much greater appreciation, and I see the fruits of my labor in the pro bono world much more than I do in the for-profit world. And the reason is simple. I give my clients in the business world great work, I do great work for them, and they give me back their money. In the world of pro bono work and in the world of public interest work, it's not the same dynamic. But you get incredible experience, and I say this as someone who is very heavily involved in the pro bono community in Philadelphia. You have tremendous lawyers, excellent lawyers, that could be making tremendous amounts of money, or at least multiples of what they're making in the nonprofit world by being in the for-profit world. But when I talk to them, they tell me, you know what, I wouldn't get the personal satisfaction. You know, Ivy League trained lawyers who end up making $30,000, $40,000 a year in the nonprofit world could not be happier. Ivy League lawyers who make 7 figures in the for-profit world could not be more miserable. And possibly could not be more miserable people either. It sort of goes hand in hand. So keep in mind that the practice of law, and one of the wonderful things about the practice of law in the United States is that for all of the differences, one of the most amazing things about U.S. society is that there are so many people in this country. There are a lot of very different people in this country. And there are a lot of people who truly do this out of the kindness of their heart, who get personal satisfaction out of doing this kind of work. And if what you want to do is, number one, I don't know how many of you are interested in litigation versus corporate or transactional work, but there is room for both in the nonprofit world as well. There's a shortage of people that want to go into the nonprofit world, which means it's a better market for lawyers. The amount of experience you will get in the nonprofit world could far exceed what you could get in the for-profit world. Okay, I've worked in firms with hundreds of lawyers. And I've been fortunate in that the nature of the work that I've done has not been the traditional, maybe, younger lawyer work. Keep in mind that if you end up, let's say, in a litigation practice at a major New York law firm, most of your time, believe it or not, will be devoted to reviewing boring financial documents. Okay? 10 hours a day of reading financial statements. Sounds very exciting.
12 to 14.
There you go. Well, no, because then you have to write up what you read. I mean, it's just you read for 8 to 10, and then you type up what you got out of them for 4 hours. Alternatively, sounds very exciting. You might go into a securities class action firm. And that means you're going to be reading 10Ks and 10Qs for, I don't know, the better part of 16 hours a day to try to find one screw-up in one line that might help your client. But you're still going to have to go back and read 5 years' worth of SEC filings. And when you go into the nonprofit world, more likely than not, within your first 2 weeks, you're going to be in court. Within your first week, you're going to have met 8 clients. Oh, that's the other thing. Large law firms, likely you will never meet a client. You may never speak to them. Your only clients are internal. So if what you're looking for is a learning experience, it's an appreciation for what the world of U.S. legal practice is, keep in mind that your options are not limited to a big law firm. It depends really on what your idea of employment in the U.S. will boil down to. If it boils down to, I want to learn, then there are many options that are not in-house and that are not in the business world that will give you tremendous exposure. And trust me, the work environment at a nonprofit could be more intense than at a large law firm. But you will arrive with a big smile and you will leave with a big smile, and sometimes you'll end up leaving with tears in your eyes, both good and bad. I can tell you that handling pro bono cases is the only time I ever get emotional in doing litigation. But I was doing a presentation for a for-profit client in Colombia maybe 7 or 8 years ago, 6 years ago. And I had a 2-week trial in a massive pro bono case. And our judgment and our court opinion came down while I was in this office in Colombia, and it popped up on my, at the time, BlackBerry, when people still had BlackBerries. And I asked my client, is there any chance you can print this out for me? While we're, just ask the secretary or somebody to print this out for me. He said, sure. I finished my meeting, I walked out, and I found it was a 220-page court opinion. And I sat there and I read it. And then, about 5 minutes in, I said, I'm going to go back to my hotel. And I sat there and I finished reading the 220 pages straight. It was about 4 hours worth of my time. And when I was done, when I got to the final page, I realized I couldn't read anymore because there were tears rolling down my cheeks and my eyes were watery. And I wasn't going to get a single phone call, by the way, from any client. Because, my clients weren't going to call me. And this was what I call cause litigation. It wasn't something for an individual. But rather a very large case for a large group of individuals, and it was going to benefit a large group of individuals. And the personal reward I've gotten out of that single case far exceeds any emotional reward that I've gotten from the practice of law in any other case. So keep in mind that learning and practice don't just boil down to business or transactional work or for-profit litigation. There is a lot to be learned, and a great deal to be learned about U.S. society and the U.S. legal system in the nonprofit world, too.
I couldn't agree more with your assessment of the mega firm or large-scale for-profit focus. The reality is there's a lot of misery among lawyers in America. Certain people you have are destined to do transactional work that can be very dry and be excellent at it and get some kind of satisfaction out of that. But in my observation, it's a rare person who can discipline himself or herself to spend 15 hours a day at a law firm doing nothing but assessing documents or looking at transactions for the sake just of money without any kind of emotional satisfaction. I was sort of in this position. I worked in enough big firms to realize that pro bono work was something that some of the lawyers, especially litigators, tended to take very seriously and saw as a noble thing to do in addition to their for-profit work. But a lot of attorneys were just like, oh, it's the pro bono necessity that we have to do X number of hours of pro bono work, and my God, that's going to take me away from doing this transactional work, which is going to be what makes me a partner, which is what I ultimately want. For me, I realized that I couldn't have that divided existence where you're doing a certain outrageous number of billable hours to make partner, and then getting the satisfaction of doing pro bono work when you can. At FINRA, what I do is, and I think everybody, even if in the nonprofit world, you go through days where it's challenging or it's boring. But if you get up every morning, as I do, and I think, well, I may not want to go to work today, or this may be a boring task I'm involved in. I think the ultimate goal of protecting investors in America, which is FINRA's job, protecting them from unethical broker-dealers or revising ads that are appearing in newspapers that could deceive the public. I think, well, this may not be the most interesting thing, this is a difficult period, but ultimately what I'm doing is serving the public, and that gives me the satisfaction, it gives me more energy to get through those difficult periods. So to me, I was lucky to find a situation where it wasn't an either-or thing, but I think that's incredible. We're talking more about the technique of getting jobs here and how to appeal to American employers, but be aware of what you're getting into, what the ultimate goal is of once you get that position. Are you going to be happy for the next 6 months or a year or 10 years doing what you're doing? It's a critical question.
One thing in all of this, in making decisions and what you want to do, and which parts do you want to take, one thing that I think is critical here that I've experienced since I've advised or mentored students from the LLM class over the years is timing. It's important on everything. I say this and then they don't listen to me. When I was in that position as well, I didn't listen to anybody. But I'm going to say it anyway, and I know like 99% of you wouldn't listen to me. If you really want to get any job in this country, this is the time to start. I mean today. Now. I mean, once you get out of this place, start putting all of this stuff you've heard here into practice. Start drafting letters, start preparing your resumes, start making contacts. This is the time to start. Unfortunately, from where I come from, it wasn't that way. It was like you go to school, after school you look for a job. But in this country, you're in school, you more or less know where you're going to work. From JD students, after your first year, 1L, right, you get to work in a law firm, you start developing relationships there. So by the time you get to 3L, you already have a job, you already have an idea where you're going to work. But in most places where, outside of the US, you don't start to look for a job until after school. It is not that way in this country. You have to start looking for a job while you're in school. So start making all of the contacts that you need to make now. Your friends from home, your friends' friends, your uncle's sister, brothers, uncle's wife, start connecting with everyone. No relationship is too far, is too removed from you to make meaningful contact with. Start making the contact now. I'm going to say this and I'm going to repeat it, but I know 99% wouldn't listen to me and they wouldn't do it. You just don't have the time. The 1 year LLM program is just, it goes fast. You don't know. Before you know it, it's spring break. Before you know it, you're out of school. And you're like, okay, what am I going to do? I have 3 months to do for a job. You don't have 3 months to do a job. You have like 9 months or how many months now to the program? You have that time now. Start making all of the contacts. Start looking for the job. Start making the phone calls. Start putting your resumes together. Start now.
Plan it out.
Yeah, plan it out.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, having known at the time that I was going to need to sit for the Pennsylvania bar, I had done research for about 6 months to make sure that I could sit for the Pennsylvania bar because ultimately I was going to live in Philadelphia. Once I figured out that I could, I went to check, well, what are the requirements for a foreign-trained lawyer to sit for the bar exam in Philadelphia, or in Pennsylvania, I'm sorry. And I went to find out, which meant that the moment I got my list of courses from Penn Law for both the fall and the spring semester, I sat down, I made a grid that reflected the week of the first semester and the week of the second semester. And I needed to have credits in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different classes. So I figured out a way that I could get all the credits in to the week of the first semester and the week of the second semester. And what I had to go do was to go see Dean Fitz at the time and say, and say, I need special dispensation, I need more credits. 15 or 16 credits a semester are not going to cut it for me to be able to do what I need to do. Can I take 18 credits on the first